Did you have anything to do with the murders of Abby or Libby?
Not at all. And I've gave up my DNA, a hair follicle test. I've done everything they wanted me to.
So that is essentially the question that we're asking: is Keegan Klein linked to this case, right? And it's kind of a yes or no question. And then the other part of it is, how is he linked to this case, right? If you say he's not linked, then I think you've got to argue, well, what is the relevance of this transcript, which came out in, I think, was it March of this year, somewhere around there, but it's actually from 2 years ago. It's from August 2020. And now we're going to deal with another news report dealing with when that came out. So let's just go over here.
He's not facing charges related to the Delphi murders, but according to this newly revealed transcript, police think he knows a lot more than he's saying.
So do you guys agree with that? Do you guys think that he does know a lot more than he's saying? What do you guys think about that? So we are going to look at the interview transcript. I actually thought I had brought it up. Oh, there it is. Okay. So we are going to look at this transcript. And I've got to say that the difficulty I think we are facing is, where on the spectrum do we need to sort of look? Is the case this serious, or that serious, right? Obviously it's a double homicide, so I mean that's how serious it is. Plus it will probably have SA involved and all of that stuff, right? So I mean, I don't want to minimize how serious that is, but what I'm saying is, beyond that, how serious is it? Is there a second perpetrator? Is there even a third perpetrator? What was involved with the staging? How serious were the injuries and all that kind of thing? In other words, what I'm trying to say is, the part that is really difficult to quantify, because we don't have that information, is that level of seriousness. And it's kind of double blind because we also don't know so little about Richard Allen. And we've got this very weird thing where, in order to find out about Richard Allen, we sort of go to Keegan Klein, right? And I think you've kind of got to ask, does that make sense? And I think you've kind of got to acknowledge that it sort of doesn't. That the best way to find out about Richard Allen is through Richard Allen, not through some other individual, right? S.M. Kovalinski says, I think his connection to the murders is essential. But the question is, how is he connected? That's really the issue. Marcel Gray, good to see you. Zenaida, he might know something. It is quite interesting where she says the authorities think that he knows more than he's actually saying. And that's where it kind of gets quite interesting. What does he know? What isn't he saying, right? What isn't he saying? So the reason we are here is we're talking about this crime, the double murder of these two girls. It's Abby Williams on the left, 13 years old. Let me bring it up. And Libby German on the right, Liberty German, 14 years old. And it's a crime that happened almost 6 years ago. Richard Allen is going to be in court January 13, exactly a month ahead of the 6-year anniversary, right? So I've tried to kind of address some of these issues of, what do we know about Richard Allen? What have we learned in addition to Richard Allen? And one of the best ways to find out about a person if you can't speak to them, is go and speak to their family. If you can't speak to their family, go and speak to kids they were at school with, neighbors, all that kind of thing. And so we are going to deal with that, right? But I want to ask that question again on this sort of range of how serious a crime are we dealing with? And it sort of goes from lone wolf, who was targeting Libby, only Libby, to, I guess, multiple perpetrators and even a serial killer, right? And I think you've got to start narrowing that swaying pendulum. You can't keep going like this, right? So let me ask you guys a question. If you look at this news story, this is a news story that came out, not actually sure when it came out, but it's dealing with, so I actually thought it would be, it's not actually the story that I thought it was. Sorry, that's an error. It's dealing with the disappearance of 2 other kids, right? Let me just bring it up. So there's this theory that there could be 2 other victims in the story, and they are cousins, Elizabeth Collins and Lyric Cook Morrissey, 10, who vanished while riding their bikes around the small towns of Evansdale, Iowa, right? Is there anyone here who thinks that Richard Allen has anything to do with that? Anyone thinks that there's a link to that? It's a crime that happened 8 years ago in 2012. So in other words, did this predate the Delphi murders? Interestingly, the host from the Today Show referred to it as Delphi. That's how I know it. Delphi in Greece. But anyway, so it's this case. Also, 2 youngsters that were killed. Is there anyone here who thinks that Richard Allen is implicated in that? This case. Let's see what you guys say. SM Kovalinsky says it's possible. Deborah says we shouldn't rule it out. Wolfie says, and that's exactly how I feel, Iowa, not Indiana, Iowa. And so what is the bottom line? Well, the bottom line is it's separated by 400 miles, right? It's separated by 400 miles. And so if you put me on this case, right? If I was investigating this case, then I would want to put certain things on my desk, and I would want to clear certain things off my desk, right? So in other words, I would say, let us look at what is relevant to this case, who is relevant, and not get distracted by things that aren't relevant, right? Now, I haven't gone into this case regarding the 2012 case in a lot of detail, but purely on the basis that it's separated by 400 miles. Richard Allen wasn't a traveling salesman. He wasn't a guy. He was a guy who sort of worked in Delphi, right? He had a child. He had a wife. He wasn't sort of flying around the country. Just on the basis that it's separated by 400 miles, I would tend to say I don't think so, right? It's not very scientific, and I suppose one could go into more detail. But I really don't think that there is a link, right? So I'm certainly not going to take that line of inquiry further, right? So in other words, in terms of that pendulum, I wouldn't go as far as saying, oh, I think he's a serial killer. So in other words, I would push that pendulum back a bit, right? We still don't know how serious it is, and that's why we must get a better handle on Richard Allen himself. Behind me is an aerial shot of his house. What does his house tell us about him? What do his ex-classmates say about him? We're going to go into that in a moment. What does the crime potentially say about the criminal? Okay. And so it is based on this podcast that, let me bring it up. It's based on this podcast, this particular episode, The Delphi Murders, Who is Rick Allen, that I got the following information I'm going to share with you. I was disappointed that they didn't provide, I'm putting a link in chat. I was disappointed that they didn't provide the voices, the original voices of the classmates they spoke to. So that creates a barrier. You're not really getting exactly what they're saying. You're not really getting that unfiltered sense. It's transcribed, and then they are kind of giving sometimes verbatim, sometimes a third person assessment of what that person said, right? In other words, it's adding a layer of noise to what you want to know. Nevertheless, it is quite useful. And so we're going to go to that. How this came onto my radar actually was Terry Dean told me about it. My bad, I didn't really get a chance to listen to it. I'm trying not to pay too much attention to other creators. I just want to sort of go my own way, but there are certain occasions where you must make an exception. For example, when certain key witnesses are interviewed, then it's quite important that you do that, right? Anyway, also how this came on my radar today was this article in The Sun. Where is it? Just give me a second. I just need to bring it up again. Let me just share this article. I think it's, yeah. So this article is published in The Sun today. Can you guys see that? Eerie past. Delphi murder suspects' old classmates reveal new info tying Richard Allen to Snapchat video and about carpools with him. And so I read this article, got some information in it, but it actually referred all the way back to this podcast that I've kind of not been paying attention to. And so I did listen to it. I don't know if you guys have, and I made a couple of notes. And that's what I'm going to take you guys through as a kind of a primer to listening to this transcript. So let me ask you guys a question. Let's just test your knowledge on this case. Did Richard Allen have a brother, or does Richard Allen have a brother? Charles Garrett, he says, after Richard is arrested, now there's more questions than answers. Leah says, I've saved it to listen to. Do you guys know, does Richard Allen have a brother? Bria says no. Graz, good to see you. Terry, good to see you as well. JT, good to see you. Not there yet. There will have to be some connection. Okay. So Deborah says, not sure if he had a brother. Songbird says, I don't know. Wolfie says, I don't think he had a brother. Daylight Disinfectant says he does. Jade says no brother. Omad says no brother. So it's quite a simple question. Does Richard Allen have a brother? The answer is no, he doesn't have a brother. Does Richard Allen have a sister? It's a very simple question just in terms of his family life. Does he have a sibling? Yes or no, right? It's quite important that you start with those basic things before you start thinking, is he a serial killer, right? Start with what you know and anchor it in some of the obvious things before you go all the way to the other end, right? So does he have a sister? Catherine Wall says younger sister. Gid says yes. Griffin Holdham says he has a sister. Jade, yes, a sister. James Houghton, good to see you here. Bria Lay says he had a sister. John Hammer. Okay, so yeah, so all of you are right. He does have a sister. He does have a younger sister. And that's also someone we would love to talk to. What was their relationship like? Think about Chris Watts and his sister. His sister was an extrovert and older than him and seemed to be very well adapted, and he was this crushed in individual. Was there anything like that in this case? Was his sister an extrovert? Was his sister very successful? What is the deal there, right? Okay, so I think you'll agree that just on that little score, some of us have made a little bit of progress. He doesn't have a brother. He does have a sister, and she's potentially someone else that we could either talk to or perhaps find something out about, what job did she get? Is she married? What happened there? Where is she living, right? The other thing that we know, but we've gotten confirmation of in this podcast through the classmates, is that he was very quiet. Not that he was a quiet guy, very quiet, unusually quiet. What does that mean? This is quoting from this podcast. It's from the murder sheet, the Delphi murders, Who is Rick Allen. He was described as a fade into the background kind of person. And that is exactly the way Chris Watts was described by one of the Lindstroms. Said that he was also, you would have a party and he would just sort of melt away, wouldn't say anything, would sort of withdraw into the background, right? So none of that is new, but it basically confirms what we've been hearing in other places. So sometimes a rumor is a rumor. Well, now we're getting reinforcement for this idea, right? So here is another little note to jot down in your notebook, right? If you've got it with you, is, did you know that he lived in Peru, Indiana as well? Richard Allen lived in Peru, Indiana as well. Well, who else lived there? Stargirl says, lacking in confidence. Don't be too quick to draw that conclusion, because we also know that he went to law enforcement, and he actually told law enforcement, I was actually in the area. I was on those trails on the day those girls disappeared. That's not someone lacking in confidence. That's quite brazen, right? That's actually someone with a fair degree of social, I don't want to say skill, but kind of talent, right? I think in the same way you could say Chris Watts is a guy lacking in confidence. Well, he seemed to have quite a lot of confidence during the sermon on the porch. So just be careful thinking that someone who is quiet lacks confidence. They may actually have a strong sense of determination in a different kind of way, right? Think also about living in plain sight in the middle of a homicide investigation. That kind of takes confidence as well. Do you know what I mean? You might say that he lacks obvious confidence, or that he lacks outward confidence, but maybe has a kind of inward confidence instead. Maybe something else is going on instead. So, did you know that he lived in Peru, Indiana as well? And as far as I understood, he attended North Miami High School. That's also quite important, is, which school did he attend, right? And I've got a couple of images from when he attended school. This is him when he was younger. Shall I bring that up? I think this was posted to Reddit. And there's another image of him. quite a sort of penetrating stare, doesn't he? Not so much in this image, but in that one. You also get a little bit of a sense of his hair in this particular image. You get a bit of a sense of what's going on with his hairstyle and how he wears his hair, because you don't see that in too many other images. There you get a sense of that slightly curly hair or something going on at the top that you see in that one portrait, right? Okay. So some additional information courtesy of this podcast is that his grandfather's name was Homer D. Allen, and he was an elementary school principal, right? And apparently he was also a supervising principal. He was also a teacher. And some of the kids remembered that Richard was made fun of because his grandfather was the principal. I can't find anything about Homer D. Allen. I can't really find anything. But he was an elementary school principal, I believe, at North Miami High School. He was a teacher, I guess, at various schools. And as soon as you think about that his grandfather was an elementary school principal, I think it starts, and also a teacher, I think it starts, you start to get a sense that of an elementary school, you start to get a sense of the fabric around the Allen family may have included more children than a normal family. I'm talking about children besides their own children, if you know what I mean. In other words, other children who are school kids might be part of their conversations, part of their everyday routines, far more so than in other families. Does that make sense? So it is quite strange. Someone said, I wonder what became of his own father. Can you see how we already seem to know more about his grandfather than his own father? We actually know very, very little about his parents. Dave says, I bet you can get away with a lot of stuff when your grandfather is the principal, or the opposite. You can't get away with anything. I know a teacher whose kids got straight A's at school, and they were really regimented by their own mother. They did really, really well, but and I think her one daughter became a doctor. So it's not necessarily that's the case, right? Okay, so I thought this was quite interesting because I did wonder, what was his school life like? Did he just become quiet? Was he naturally quiet, or was it sort of a certain amount of nurture that led to him being quiet? So one of the classmates says she remembers kids teasing Rick because his grandfather was the principal. Now, we don't know on that pendulum, was he teased a lot? What we do know is he was probably teased during elementary school, which means he probably would have been, how can I put it? He sticks out to all the other kids because your grandfather's the principal, right? So in that way, he isn't part of that sort of society of kids. He is different. You can also imagine that possibly some of the kids wouldn't include him in certain conversations because he could go and tell his grandfather. It's not so much at elementary school level that you'd imagine that happening, but more at high school, where, you know, if you're gonna be a truant or whatever, well, we don't want him to know that because he could tell someone, right? It does make you wonder if at a very early point in his schooling, he felt a bit like an outsider. He felt a little pushed aside, right? And if he felt that way as a young kid, how did that affect him kind of going forward? You know, did he lose an aspect of his childhood? Then we know he graduated 1991, or maybe some of you know that, some of you don't. He graduated 1991. Is there significance to that date? Then some other classmates said, I don't remember who you're talking about. So in terms of when they wanted to talk about Richard Allen, some of the friends who did remember him spoke to other classmates and they said, I don't know who you're talking about. And have you ever had that experience, like at a reunion or something, where you literally cannot remember somebody that you spent years with? Well, Richard Allen was one of those kids. He was so quiet that he was almost invisible, right? And long before we've gotten to this point in the narrative, I suggested that did the person who committed this crime with very young children, did he do that because he felt insignificant, right? Was that a feeling of insignificance that came all the way from school, and that in a way he wanted to get his comeuppance in terms of that setting? I think he got married very close to 1991 as well. And oh, is that when he got married? Okay. Didn't they? Okay. So I stand corrected. So when did he graduate? Did he graduate 89? Anyway, he did, or 90. He did graduate. Sorry, he did get married very young. He was 19. Kathy Allen was also 19. IPMO project says, I feel that his height affected his ego. He may have felt better than the other kids. His height may have affected his ego. Okay. Then I thought this was a really interesting comment. You can either put it on your desk and file it away and say this is like a red flag, or you can say maybe it's someone who's projecting. Maybe it's actually not that important. But one of the classmates said she remembered that he walked in a closed, hunched, nobody look at me way of walking, right? That's quite interesting. That the sort of long-term, this is going back, I guess, decades, the long-term memory of Richard Allen was that he walked in a closed fashion, generally in a hunched fashion. You can almost imagine, even at school, maybe he put his hands in his pockets and looked down, and kind of had this sort of nobody look at me vibe about him, right? Which maybe shows that he was shy, right, or awkward. Now, I remember I've got quite a vivid memory of when I was in high school. One particular day, I was just walking. I was in an all-boys school. I was just walking along the balcony on the first or second floor to the classroom. And one of my own classmates like smacked my arm like really, really hard. And I said, geez, what's that about? And he said, stop walking like this with your arms like that. And I said, I'm not doing that. He said, you are. You're walking like this. You're trying to show how big you are. And it was actually quite funny because I was a swimmer, because I was swimming all the time. Kind of the muscles in my what do they call them? I think it's the triceps. Just sort of created that slightly triangular shape, right? And because this guy didn't look like that, he thought I was kind of posturing, and I wasn't. But I just remember the aggressiveness of that. Someone just deciding, well, you think you're too big for your boots, and this guy literally just slapping my arms as I walked by him, like, stop posturing, right? And I was like, no, I'm not doing anything. That's how I naturally walk. But that is how guys can be to other people, where it's almost like, don't you need to know your place. You belong at this point on the pecking order. Don't try and punch above your weight. If you do, we'll bring you back down to size, right? And you can kind of imagine that in a scenario like that. I don't know how sporty Richard Allen was at school, but if he was quite short, maybe played a bit of baseball, I don't know. But you kind of get the sense that if he was walking in a closed thing, looking down, maybe wasn't that sporty, maybe in terms of his physical size, he felt that he sort of had to be even smaller and even more crushed in order to not be a target of bullying or derision or criticism or whatever it was. There is, to me, a bit of an analogy of somebody who at a school level decides to be quiet, decides to become invisible. And the fabric of this case, which takes place in a forest where someone is hoping to disappear inside this forest. Isn't there a bit of an analogy in that sense? Do you guys see that? I just want to see if I can bring up a picture of what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's basically this idea of I'm invisible in my world, and so if I'm going to commit this crime where I might stick out, I want to remain invisible, right? I want to be somewhere where I'm not going to be seen. Okay. Daylight says T, so became invisible. Kami Budget says unimportant. Hamilton Art says, why kill two girls though? Do you remember that Chris Watts was also quite an overweight youngster, quite a fat kid, and so was Brian Laundrie. Quite interesting. Okay. The other thing that I thought quite interesting, again from this podcast, was that somebody said they went to, this is how I understood it, maybe I misunderstood it, but this person went to the pharmacy, I think it's the CVS pharmacy in Delphi, and somebody said something, and that made her look up, and she saw this man with a clipboard, and the man was Richard Allen, and she remembered that he spoke slowly, but not stupidly, but the voice made her look up, and she thought there was something familiar about it, and then saw the name tag, and the name tag said Richard Allen. The problem with a statement like that is, here is a podcast and someone wants to interview you and you want to speak to them and you want to say something relevant. It's hard to say whether they are embellishing after the fact, or they somehow, the original experience gets changed by current knowledge, or whether that original experience was exactly the way it said. The only way you would know that is if you interviewing that person directly. And unfortunately, we don't have that. That's why it's so frustrating to have these third-hand transcribed versions. It's very hard to say what you're dealing with. The point is that of all three classmates, none of them said, you know what, I actually doubt it. No one said, I don't actually think Richard Allen's the right guy. Does that make sense? So in other words, they kind of accepted that, but then they did say he didn't seem to show any obvious red flags. But I think the problem with that is, do you know how to look for that? So isn't someone who's that quiet, like extremely quiet, isn't that a red flag already, right? So somebody said earlier that that they thought that Richard Allen was not confident. Well, he was actually interviewed after the murders, not because they found him, but because he went to them. He went to law enforcement, right? And what's also quite interesting is, as far as I understand this podcast, they said, according to his wife, according to Kathy, law enforcement had already spoken to him. But actually, that's not how it happened. Law enforcement didn't come knocking at their door. It's not like law enforcement came to them, spoke to him, and excused him. He went to them. He went to the police himself. And he said that he was on the trails at the time. Now, if you think about that, his wife saying law enforcement interviewed him and dismissed him, that's very different from saying, well, I was actually there that day, so I'm going to go and speak to law enforcement and clear my name, right? It's totally different. Do you think Kathy Allen would say that? And I think it does raise this question of, wouldn't Kathy Allen know, wouldn't his wife know that he was sort of in the area by his own admission? Wouldn't that raise a little flag in her mind, right? Now, what's quite interesting is this podcast have been adamant that it wasn't his wife that turned him in. They say that's a rumor. There's also a rumor that his brother turned him in. Well, he doesn't even have a brother. The part that I found really bizarre, and maybe I didn't listen to the podcast properly or accurately or completely, because I didn't listen to the whole thing. But the part that I found quite bizarre was they said the way Richard Allen was found wasn't from a tip coming in. It was literally from an investigator going through old records and then reviewing them, and then that's sort of how it happened. Now, I don't really know what that means. Does it mean they went through records of what Keegan Klein said, like in 2020? Were they going through old records from 2020? Is that what happened? And is that kind of how it happened? The thing I was waiting for is for them to say Keegan Klein, and they sort of didn't. So I thought that was strange in terms of this podcast. I thought that would be obvious in my view. So did you guys know that he actually said that he was on the trails at the time of the murders? A question that I've written down here with my notes is, did he have to get married? Like, why did they get married at 19? Was it because he had to get married? What are the circumstances surrounding that? The other thing that's quite interesting is that Kathy attended Peru High School. They didn't attend the same high school. Graduated in 1991. I think they married the same year. Both married at 19. Jennifer Strickland, good to see you, says, I've heard that Richard Allen was transferred to a Walmart in 2012, only an hour and a half from Evansville, due to harassment at work. He then quit Walmart. So that is quite interesting. I do know that he did work at Walmart, but when you say only an hour and a half from Evansville, it's still quite a long way. It's still not Evansville. Still not Evansville, but that is interesting. Kathy worked at Wendy's in Logansport. So you kind of get a sense that they were sort of blue collar workers, that they were sort of ordinary folk, right? That they were leading fairly ordinary lives. She worked at a Wendy's. Not that that's, I mean, I think a lot of people when they leave school have ordinary jobs. I was one of them. I worked in a bicycle shop for a short while. He worked at a sales and delivery at Mr. Steve's RV. Now, do you remember I said earlier, it doesn't make sense to me that this crime could have taken place in Evansville? Well, unless he was someone who got around, unless he delivered parts far and wide. And if he worked at sales and delivery, maybe he did drive around. So that's starting to move the pendulum back slightly. But we'd have to find out when he worked there, was he actually a delivery driver? Did he do any deliveries to Evansville? Or sorry, Evansdale, right? Okay. Let's bring that up again. Where is it? There it is. Okay. So now we've got a little bit more background where she worked, where he worked. And I think I've got just one page left here. So can you think about other crimes where somebody said, I was there, like I was there, but it's no big deal, right? So Rick Allen kind of said, yeah, I was there. I was in that kind of reserve. But I'm not really a suspect, right? Can you think of other cases where someone said something similar and then were they a suspect or not? Well, there are actually quite a few cases. Amanda Knox, she was in the house of her housemate, actually at the time that her body was in the house. So she was there. I was there. Okay, so are you a suspect for murder? In the John Benet Ramsey case, the parents and her brother were there. It's acknowledged. We were in the house when John Benet was murdered. I was there. Well, should they be suspects? Should all of them be suspects, or should one of them be a suspect because they were there? In the Stephen Avery case, the same thing. Where were you when Teresa Holbach visited the junkyard? Well, I was there. I was celebrating Halloween. I made a big fire. Paul Flores, where were you when Kristen Smart disappeared? Well, I was actually at the party. I actually saw Kristen Smart because she was kind of drunk and she was on a lawn, and I sort of helped her to her. I was there. Okay, but we're not going to arrest you. You convinced us that it's not you. Think about Chris Watts when he got up in the morning and went to work. Yeah, well, I was there. I did see Shanann. We had a conversation. Then I went to work. Yeah, I was there, but then I went to work. She was there as well. Then I went to work. Oscar Pistorius. Well, he was right there when his girlfriend died. Well, yeah, I was there, but I thought that something else was going on. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cases where you also had an I was there scenario, and think about the outcomes of those cases. What happened with Paul Flores ultimately? What happened with Chris Watts ultimately? What happened with Oscar Pistorius ultimately? What happened with Stephen Avery ultimately? All right. It's always a dangerous situation when someone is at the scene of a murder, let alone a triple murder, when they were one of the last people to see someone, or they were in the area, or what were you doing there? Right? So anyway, that is the material I sort of put together based on just listening to that particular episode. I don't know if you guys learned something that you don't know already, but maybe you do. I must also tell you, I was sent some information, not going to say from who, but basically from a certain resource saying, I think this is helicopter footage through the canopy, you know, as sort of thin as it was, because it was winter. And this is helicopter footage, and you can actually see you can make out through the crime scene, similar to Adventures with Purpose, where people are trying to see the smudged out image of Kylie. They're trying to work out what are we seeing, even though it's sort of smudged out. It's kind of a similar situation of you seeing the crime scene from the air, from a helicopter, and can you actually see through that canopy, and what are you seeing? And you had people saying, well, I can see a teddy bear, a Valentine's gift, and I can see, I don't really want to go through all of it, but if you think about it, it's kind of like, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of like wish fulfillment. I really, really badly need this final piece of the puzzle. I really, really badly want to know what the answer is to this question. Well, so I'll just answer it. It's like with Kylie Rodney. We really want to see her so we know kind of what happened to her, but you can't see her. Well, why don't you just wave a magic wand and then you can see her? And some people do that. They say, there she is, there's her arms, there's her face, everything. Actually, no, you can't see her. In terms of this canopy, oh, there they are. I can see where the one victim is. I can see the other one. There's that, there's that. No, you actually can't see that. But if you really want to, I guess you can. That's how I see it. And that's why I say, when you look at that sort of thing, you've got to be very careful. It's about this whole pendulum. We don't know exactly where that pendulum belongs. Is it on a very extreme side of criminality, or is it on another side which is still bad enough, but which side is it? And that's the part where there's a lot of uncertainty. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Stargirl says, is it true that a smudged fingerprint? I don't know about that. Thanks for that, John Hammer. Marcel says, so you brought that up. I've got to say from someone's handwriting that you can see that they've committed a crime previously, I think is absolutely ridiculous. Also, just to mention this, saying that with the letter I, this represents that, and that represents your relationship with your mother, and that represents, and that means that you hate your mother or father. If you believe that, good for you. I don't think, I think that's a little bit like the, what do you call it? The astrology version of handwriting analysis, just my own personal opinion. Bundy Data says that, okay. The devil is in the details, that's true, okay. There's a super chat question from Jennifer above. Did I miss it? Yeah, well, I saw it. I've heard that RA was transferred to Walmart. It's Evansdale, right? It always worries me when social media have a theory and law enforcement don't seem to have any concerns about it. That always worries me, because social media always want to sensationalize something. Social media always want to make it worse and more shocking. So we had exactly that scenario in the Gabby Petito case. So it's basically, let's stop trying to figure out what happened to Gabby Petito, and let's look at this double murder in Moab. Maybe Brian Laundrie is a serial killer, and let's like really make our eyes wide like that, right? Maybe Brian Laundrie is a serial killer. Maybe he's not. And it turned out, I think, that he isn't. And I think a lot of social media, a lot of YouTube channels made a lot of hay going down that route that everyone wanted them to go down because it's shocking and sensational. But was there actually anything linking him to that? Why would he be interested at all in that? And the same thing applies here. Why would he want to go to Evansdale? What would connect him in any way to that, unless you say it's completely random? I think you've got to look at the connections in this case, right? The social media, Snapchat connections in this case. Well, do they apply to that case in 2012? Do they? So I don't know if that makes sense. Mary's just laughed out loud for real. Okay. Well, I'm glad to be amusing. Okay, so Magical Mother says, I hate the salacious and sensational attitudes. Okay, so now we're going to deal with the transcript. That's really what this is about. So let's go to that. Okay. Let's bring it up. State of Indiana versus Keegan Klein. Now, one of the questions we've got is there a connection between Keegan Klein and Richard Allen? And I think, in a way, you can take the pressure off yourself and say, what does law enforcement think? Are we going to see that question come up from law enforcement? In other words, Keegan Klein, do you know anything about Delphi? When they ask him questions, does Delphi ever come up? Well, if it does, it means they think that there is a connection, right? So this is dated, can you see that? August 19, 2020. Can you see that? August 19, 2020, videotape statement. It would be really good to see the video. And I'm not really going to go through the beginning, but except to say, can you see, he says, here you go, brother, thank you, appreciate it. And all of that is meant to make him really comfortable. It's a lot like Coda and Chris Watts. You want to try and establish a rapport. If the if the shadow of the policeman on the wall could show how he really felt, you'd probably see steam coming out of his ears, like, I'm dealing with a real horrible member of society. I don't really think of him as my brother, but in order to get him to talk to him, he's got to really approach him on the same level. He's got to use expletives here and there. I think somewhere along the line, he talks about talking shit with kids. That's what the cop says, because he's trying to communicate on the same level and language as this person, right? So there's some of that going on here as well. So I'm not going to go, I'm going to skip through all of this. There's a point where you can see, I appreciate it, this and that. And then his Mirandized, Detective Vito comes in. He says, Keegan, hey, I don't think I introduced myself. There's an introduction. Here he's Mirandized, right? My name's Detective Vito. These are your rights. Page 6. Do you understand? I'm not going to go through any of that. And then all the charges that he goes, that is being accused of or / charged with, lots of them. These are all charges. I'm not going to go through that. That's on page 8, and then we're going to pick up the narrative on page 9, right? So after all the introductions are done, all the charges are read, after he's Mirandized, we're going to start with page 9, right? Are you guys okay with that? So we're going to now deal with the transcript, and once we've dealt with it for a while, I'm going to come back to this question of why did this even happen? Why? Because someone said, why would you commit double murder? And I'm going to try and deal with that question. If I don't, just remind me. Okay. So we're going to go here to this part here, and remember the section in the video where he was asked, or somebody said, is he being completely honest, right? I wonder if I can play that again. It's not that video. I think it's this video. Let me try and play that clip again. I think it's from here.
To this newly revealed transcript, police think he knows a lot more than he's saying.
Right? That's really important to bear that in mind, that although he's revealing things, he knows a lot more. Well, what more does he know? And this was August 2020, right? That lot more, what came out between August 2020 and August 2022, right? So we're going to go to this point. It's on page 9, right? Let me do it like this. And so he says, and so I told that, I can't remember her name. She was like I don't know something with a child division. All those are old videos when I was underage. So right on page 9, right in the beginning, he's kind of saying, is dismissing all the evidence and saying, those are old videos. Those images that are so, what's the word, kind of shocking, people not wearing clothing, right? He dismisses that to say, those are old videos when I was underage. In other words, if I was underage when someone who is also underage sent me something, well, then I'm off the hook, right? And then this is what the detective says. Well, and I want to make it clear that we not only have watched your interviews, he says, right, but we've personally gone through each device. Right? We've watched the videos, yeah? We've seen the pictures, and I can tell you were not underage at that time. So right off the bat, they've kind of caught him out. He's tried to weasel out of something, and they know what they're talking about. They're saying, no, none of that nonsense that you were underage. You were not underage, right? But how do they know this? How do they know that he wasn't underage? Right? So this should be a fair warning that Keegan is a deceptive guy, a liar. This should be a fair warning in terms of the rest of his statements, that he's not going to just say what they need to know, right? Despite them kind of catching him out, he says, okay, of all the underage girls I talked to, I was definitely underage for any of those pictures that I got from them, right? So he's insisting, no, I was underage. And so this is the response. That's not what the data that we have on the metadata of those images. I mean, they're time-stamped. In other words, they know when he sent and received them. They know for a fact that he wasn't underage, right? So as slippery as Keegan is, the cops are really onto him. And so he's, oh, right, I see, okay. And then he says, when we take that phone, we get a lot of information off that, right. So now he's been caught out in that particular lie, right? So earlier in the interview, as I say, Keegan was read a host of charges against him. Now he begins to query one of them, and it's this one. So the detective says, I mean, it's been a little while, obviously, but, and then he says, and a few of those charges, can I see that again? So I can ask. Then the detective says, yeah, which one were you thinking about? Then he says, I don't know, I can't remember. My mind's going crazy right now. What is child, that word, right? What is that? Like, I've never been with a child before, anything like that. Now, he's particularly concerned. What are you saying in terms of that? Then he says, it's not necessarily being with a child, but when we go to when you're, I think that's the next part of it. On your KickChat 92 on your iPhone is when you're trading back and forth. He says, right, those images, that is what that is, right? So at that point, he's asks a question about that particular charge. Then he is satisfied about it. Then he goes on to the next one. What do you mean by obstruction of justice? He says, we're going to get to that. Okay, but I need you to understand why we're here, obviously. And then he says, and I'm just being honest with you, I mean, the underage thing, it's not correct, right? But I do think it's quite important that he doesn't want to actually say, he says, we're going to get to that. What do you think the obstruction of justice does refer to? Look where we are. We had to talk about the Delphi murders, right? Look at what he's just done in the first pages of this transcript, right? He says, no, I was underage, right? Is he telling the truth? He says, we're going to get to all that, but I need you to understand why we are here. Why do you think they are here? Why do you think they are here? What do you think this interview is all about? So in the next line, he says, 3 years ago, you were not underage, right? You were in possession of all that as well, right? So I know even in your last interview, I mean, you have a problem. So that's kind of telling him like it is, right? Although it's been kind of warm and fuzzy, it's already gone downhill from there. He's basically saying, Keegan, you have a problem. You said it yourself, yeah. And I'm assuming you know how, a problem like that does not just overnight correct itself, right? Now, I think when you take that particular statement, not only does a problem like that not correct itself like that, it also doesn't come into being like that. It is years and years of being, I guess, lonely, years and years of being, I don't know, outside the social milieu. So, for example, if he has a low self-esteem, if he's overweight, if he doesn't think he's very attractive, all those things, years and years of frustration, years and years of bad decisions, years and years of going down the path of least resistance, right? All of that is something that creates a monster. And that's why I also say it's quite hard to tell where on this pendulum do you go. Like if you think about Jeffrey Dahmer, you said, okay, Jeffrey Dahmer has committed a series of crimes. You might, and if you didn't know the Jeffrey Dahmer case, you might think, okay, well, that's quite serious. Well, do you have any idea how serious it is? Do you know what he did during those crimes? So can you see how it can be very difficult to know where, at what level of seriousness do you put that? So I went to have an MRI on Friday, and that was exactly the same question that we were asking. How serious is the issue in my knee that we can't quite see? Is it this at this end of the serious spectrum? Is it so serious that it requires surgery? Or is it not that serious, right? And the thing is, you don't know the answer. You've got a certain amount of information, a certain amount of perspective, right? And that's the same exact same issue we're dealing with in this case. How deep does this rabbit hole go? How serious is it? And we're trying to get a grasp on that, right? But this kind of addresses that issue. It's something that doesn't just happen overnight, right? And I think if you take that question at face value and you say, Richard Allen was he 45 years old when this crime was committed? That's quite old. So what was he doing between when he got married at 19 and for 26 years? Like, was he happily married, or was something festering inside of his marriage? Another thing you could ask is, or you could say is, I think Keegan Klein is 27 years old and Richard Allen is substantially older, right? 23 years older. If you take the kind of activities Keegan Klein was doing and you take Richard Allen, how much worse can it get if you're older and older and older, right? A young person can theoretically still meet someone, have a girlfriend and whatever, but isn't an older person going down a particular path that's becoming increasingly unhealthy, right? And you could ask the same question with Jeffrey Dahmer. How old was he when he committed his first crime? How old was he when he committed crime after crime after crime, right? That's also a factor, the age of the perpetrator, okay? So let's go on to the next aspect. So let me ask you guys a question. Where's a good place to start again from scratch and turn over a new leaf? Let's say you've realized that your life's not going so well. You live in America and you feel like, you know what, my life's not going very well. I need to turn over a new leaf. I want a fresh start. I want to turn my life around. Where might you go? Where would you go and where wouldn't you go? Susan Smith says rehab. Okay. So Keegan Klein says he moved to Vegas and he tried to completely change his life. And then he said, I fell on hard times, not having a good job and stuff. So I had to move back. But yeah, I mean, I haven't done any of those stuff since then. That was a real wake-up call. So kind of what he's saying here is that he instantly stopped all the things he was doing and he went to Vegas. Now, does that make sense to you? Do you think someone who is going to live a clean life, and I don't want to insult anyone because I think you can go to Vegas and have fun and you can live in Vegas and be a good person. But do you think if you're a person with a particular appetite for sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right, and you decide I want to turn over a new leaf, is the right place to go Vegas or Truckee, right? So yeah, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really make sense. So he says he went there, he fell on hard times, and he moved all the way back. Now think about that. Think about you are investigated for double murder in your home within days of what happened in Delphi, right? You then go to Vegas and things don't work out in Vegas. Well, where do you go from Vegas? Where do you go from Vegas? Just follow my reasoning. Within, I think, 10 days of the crime, that actually searched Keegan Klein's home, right? Then shortly after that, we'll get to exactly when he gets out of Dodge. He leaves Peru completely. He leaves Indiana and he goes to Las Vegas, right? Things don't work out in Vegas. Where do you go from there? Mary Steelman says Dad's basement. Does it make sense? Think about this. You were initially kind of a suspect. You were one of the people that they searched your home with regard to a double homicide. You go somewhere else to turn over a new leaf, and then you come all the way back to where all of that started. Does that make sense? Does it make sense to come back to this place where you were doing certain things on the internet, where you actually, your account certainly was communicating with somebody who died, but now you're coming back to that same place? Does that make sense to do that? And you could take it even further and say, if you decided to turn over a new leaf, right? You were where a double murder happened, and you say, okay, I've been doing some things. This was a wake up call. I'm going to go somewhere else. And then you end up coming right back, staying in the same place, coming right back. Does that make sense in terms of this whole thing of turning over a new leaf? So Jade says, I don't know if he really intended to stop. Wolfie says, really interesting, good to hear, right? So anyway, let's take it a little bit further. So he says, it was a real wake-up call. What do you think he means by it was a real wake-up call? What do you think he means by that was a real wake-up call? And what do you think he means by I haven't done any of those stuff since then? What do you think he's talking about? Let's be specific. What is this in reference to? See what you guys say. Jade says he went to Vegas to grow his business. But what was the real wake-up call? I haven't done any of what stuff since what? Since what happened? Yes, it is coming up later in this interview, but yeah, exactly. Right? So what he's actually saying is, I haven't done any of that stuff, online stuff, since then. Well, since when? Since the 13th of February. Since the Delphi murders. Since the murders, yeah. Yes. Yes. But it's important that we're explicit about this, right? And then he also says that was a real wake-up call. What is a real wake-up call? What is a real wake-up call? Answer. Sorry, that was the wake-up call. That was the wake-up call. Now, can you see he doesn't really want to say the words, and so even the officers are going to take his cue and not say the words. But it's important that we know what they're talking about, right? So remember we said, is there a connection between Keegan, Klein, and Richard Allen? Well, what do you think all of this is about? What was the real wake-up call? What was those stuff? It's dealing with the Delphi murders. Then he's asked, here is a very straight out question. When did you move to Vegas? Then he says, I'm not sure. It was about 2 years ago, right? So 2 years ago from 2020 would be 2018, right? 2018. Do you think that is accurate? Because the murders happened in early 2017, right? So it's quite a simple question. It's quite a simple question. When did you go to Vegas? When did you get out of the Delphi, Peru, Indiana area? And he basically says 2018. Is that accurate, right? Then he says, well, no, I got back about 3 years ago, probably, right? So he says, I got back about 3 years ago. So, and this is 2020. So Then he says, I don't know, I think June maybe. He says, right after my birthday, sometime it was right after that. It's kind of garbled, right? But what he's essentially saying here at the end is that so when did you move to Vegas? Garbled, blah, blah, blah. Then he says, I think June of 2017. So let's ask that question again. When did Keegan Klein go to Vegas? Answer, June 2017. Right? June 2017. So when did the crime take place? It happened in the middle of February. So you've kind of got March, April, May, 3 months. After 3 months, he leaves Indiana, goes completely out of state, right? Okay. So can you see that certainly from Keegan Klein's perspective, you kind of get the feeling that he thinks it's related to him, meaning that there's a double murder and then he goes right out of state. Remember, we were asking exactly the same question. Why, if Richard Allen committed the crime, why wouldn't he leave? Why would he stay there? Why would he live in plain sight? Well, Keegan Klein didn't want to live in plain sight. Keegan Klein, this happened, and then shortly after he left, and then he came back, right? Why did he come back? What do you think that was about? Bear in mind, after 5 years, they still hadn't caught anyone. So why not come back under that scenario? Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. So here is a question about where is he living now? So before we get to that, it's interesting that Keegan skipped town after the murders, but then he moved back to where it all happened. Richard Allen, in contrast, never skipped town. What made him move to Vegas in 2017? 3 months after the double homicide in Delphi, Keegan up and left. Why? Why did he leave? And he said, because he had a wake-up call. He said, because he had a wake-up call. Well, isn't that actually truth? Isn't that actually true? If he was busy with certain activities and he was making certain secret connections only for someone to die, well, wasn't that a wake-up call? Wasn't that absolutely a wake-up call? He was playing with fire. Not a really good way of saying it. He was, and then things got, what's the word? Things got serious. Things got out of hand, I guess you could say, from his perspective, right? Okay, so let's go to this next slide. Let's bring it up. From the transcript, do you know where you are currently living now? Like, where's your residence? He says, okay, so that's with your girlfriend, right? So he's got a girlfriend. Well, like, I stay with her sometimes, but I mean, I just bounce around really. But I mean, she lets me stay there as much as I need to. Okay, so, and this is the question. So June 2017, you moved to Vegas. Where'd you stay out there? I had an apartment. An apartment, yeah. So when he says, I just bounce around really, what do you think that's really referring to? Do you think he's able to stay somewhere for free, or does he pay? If he does pay, where does he get the money? So I did a little bit of research. This article came out at the end of April, basically a month before Keegan got himself out of Dodge, right? So I was literally thinking, if I'm Keegan Klein, right? What could have made me want to suddenly leave Delphi. I mean, he doesn't leave Delphi in March. He doesn't leave Delphi in April. He doesn't leave Delphi in May. He only leaves in June. So what happens that actually does wake him up? Because you actually get the idea it's not the double murders. Otherwise, he would have left immediately. What happens just before June that does wake him up? And this is what I think may be the answer. This article. And this came out February 24th, but then it was updated April 27th, right? Now, I've got to say, I actually missed that part about that it first came out February 24th. So I don't know how much this was updated. I really don't know. But anyway, the point is it was updated at the end of April, which leaves you with just the month of May, right? And so this is what the article says. It says the following. This is an extract from the article. Libby's phone turned out to be a valuable resource for clues on the teen's deaths. On February 15, Indiana State Police released a photo that was taken from the device showing a man walking on the Delphi Historic Trail around the same time the girls were in the area. On February 19, they named him as a suspect in the girls' murders. To generate more tips, Indiana State Police released more clues found on Libby's phone. Now, if you are reading that article, if you are Keegan Klein, the part that's going to stand out to you again and again is, oh no, they've got her phone. They found this on her phone. They found that on her phone. And you're going to be thinking, can they find me on her phone, right? They've got her phone and they're saying in the media, they found this, that, and that, right? Susanna, good to see you here. So look at what is in this article. Libby's phone turned out to be a valuable resource for clues. That's in the article. You can imagine that Keegan Klein read that in the article. He read those words in the article. Police released a photo that was taken from the device showing a man walking on the historic trail. That's another way of saying they found that on her phone, another reference to her phone. To generate more tips, they released more clues found on Libby's phone. There's the third reference. A suspect can be heard saying down the hill in an audio clip taken from a video file found on the phone. All of this information coming from Libby's phone. Do you follow? So can you see how someone who is involved would start getting really worried if they've communicated and they know they've communicated? Isn't that going to link to my phone? I better get out of the state, right? And then this is what they said. They are looking for anybody who's changed their appearance, cut their hair, shaved when they haven't in a while, or drastically changed the way they dress. That's the first thing. Started abusing drugs or alcohol when they wouldn't have beforehand. And that may apply to Richard Allen. That didn't he go to wasn't he in alcohol recovery around about this time? Has become anxious or irritable, took an unexpected trip after February 13. cancelled an appointment or social engagement on February 13 for an unexplained reason. All of this comes from this article. And so all of those things coming out in the article, which, as I say, was updated April 27, Keegan may have read and thought, jeepers, I can tick, or they can tick a couple of those things. I better skedaddle. Another one was, has obsessed over the Delphi murders and constantly talks about what they were doing on February 13. Right? And state police continue to stress the importance of reporting tips to authorities and not over social media. And they say to avoid speculation and confusion. Well, it's actually for another reason, to avoid the perpetrator running interference on those tips. You know, someone might say over social media, I think I saw something, sorry, I think I saw something, or I think this, or I think that. The perpetrator himself could interfere with those conversations and say, no, I was there that day and blah, 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 right? So they're saying, don't report this over social media, do it directly, right? You can imagine a statement like that could also be of concern to Keegan Klein, right? Okay, let's continue. So is an article like this why Keegan Klein got itchy feet? So then it says, we're going back to the transcript. What's this address, man? Then he says, what was that address? I don't know. What the hell was that address? Then he says, do you remember what street? It was on that road. That's my dad's address. I don't know. Do you remember what apartment number it was? Whatever. Live by yourself? No, I had a friend that I moved out there with. Who is that? And then he says, someone, he lived in Peru, that is redacted. Okay, what did you do for employment over there? He says, a lot of stuff. We had like a little medical marijuana business that we would do a delivery service with and stuff. Right? Do you think it's really medical marijuana, or is it just marijuana? A lot of money in that, isn't there? Yeah, there was. Yeah, a lot of elderly people, you know, that couldn't leave their house a lot and stuff like that. Do you really think it's about elderly people? Marijuana and elderly people, or marijuana and young people? Then he says, what caused you to move back? What, in other words, what caused you to come back to Indiana? And the answer is money. I just couldn't afford it. Now, if you take what he says at face value and you say it's true that money was the reason he came back, well, maybe he thought he could make more money in Indiana. I suppose you could also say he could cut his costs, but maybe he could make more money in Indiana. But look at that. I couldn't afford it. Rent was so expensive, just so expensive. So you do get a sense that that's true. Then the detective says, I could definitely see it being more expensive out that way too. Oh, yeah. My goal today, I mean, we want to try, of course, to get you to understand everything that's going on. And I think there's some things that we need to clear up. In your original interview, I mean, obviously you said it was a problem that you had. And so, I mean, you're saying it was a pretty big wake-up call, right? And then addressing this wake-up call, well, this is what you get, all of this redacted text. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I never really had a problem with the police ever in my life, and then redacted. And that's the next section. As for that, did you just stop? Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, when I realized like how serious it is, like you don't think about it when you're talking to 16 and 17-year-old girls, and then you realize when that knock comes to your door, like, hey, shit, it's not a joke. So I want to put something on your radar, right? Doesn't it seem like this guy is peddling two kinds of products, or possibly peddling two products? The one product is substances, right? And what typically happens when you are taking drugs or selling drugs, right? What typically happens? Answer: addiction. Don't you have the same situation with these other things that he's involved with? So what I'm trying to say is, isn't addiction the common denominator on both sides? That there's addiction in terms of drugs, which you can't shake quickly. It takes a while to get on them, and then you can't get off them. But isn't the same thing? Isn't the addiction also on this other stuff, the online side, right? And so, what if you're addicted in the drug thing? You're addicted in a drug or chemical sense of being addicted, but you're also addicted in an online thing. So in other words, there's a drug and online addiction going on. And the question then is, if the addiction is in both these areas, doesn't that make the addiction worse? And that raises this question: if you are on drugs, right, you've got this addiction, or is it this one? You've got this addiction, you've got this drug addiction, and while you are high, while you're on drugs, you participate, you engage in your other addiction. Doesn't the one addiction make the other addiction worse? Doesn't the other addiction make the addiction worse, right? Now think about, again, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was, I would say, addicted to fantasies in certain ways, but he was also doing other things. He was drinking a lot. So, and what does drinking do? It lowers your inhibitions. So what I'm trying to say is, when you think in a very sort of standard lateral, not lateral, a standard kind of chronological way, like a one-line way of thinking, then it's not just the case that something is escalating along a single line. It's actually something that is compounding, because it's not just an addiction to one thing, it's an addiction to another thing. And those addictions are kind of binding together and creating a more extreme combined addiction. Does that make sense? And so that idea, again, addresses the question of this needle. Where does this needle go in terms of the extreme level of this crime? Does that make sense? Okay. So then the question here is, what we can do now, I mean, you haven't viewed it since then, no, is he says, would you give us consent for your phone? Yeah, to search the phone. Okay. Do you have any computers or tablets or anything like that? I have a computer in my room, but I mean, it's not really, it's real old, right? So just going back one slide where he says, shit's not a joke. Where's that? Where he says, I just stopped. Do you believe him? Do you believe that he just stopped? Do you think the authorities believe him? Because at this point, and it kind of goes on for quite a while through the transcript, they want to know what devices you're on. Oh, I'm on a phone. Oh, I've got an Xbox. Oh, I've got a computer. Oh, it's kind of got a tower. It looks like this, it looks like that. And at the end of all that, they say, do you mind if we search and seize all of that stuff? This is in 2020. What do you think they found on that? And how is this for a hypothesis? What if something happened in February 2017, and then Keegan Klein left the area, and then nothing really happened. No one was arrested. It seemed like the crime would remain unsolved. And then at a certain point, Keegan Klein returned, right? Would he not then approach some of the same people he'd approached before and continue some of those relationships that he had before? And isn't that what possibly led to the authorities finding what they needed to find? In other words, you could have had certain profiles deleted, certain digital breadcrumbs deleted, certain of the devices involved removed, only for all of that to come back into play and those networks to reactivate. Isn't that possibly what happened? And think about it, it's under this assumption that we got away with it or you got away with it. And only at that point did the investigation then start catching up, right? What do you think about that? Yeah, Tax Cut said he went back to his old connections. Songbird says he thought he was out of the woods. Don't you have that impression? Wolfie says he felt safe. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if I want to go through this in too much detail because it's kind of boring. It's kind of dealing with all these devices. There's not really much to say. So they really talk about I've got an Xbox. Do we have consent to search that? Yeah, that's fine. What do you play on it? I play Call of Duty. Okay. This is where he uses the same kind of language. The detective's trying to sort of stay on his side. He says, you do it online, like talk shit to kids. Yeah. So think about this. If you're thinking like, what is a way that an older person can potentially find a way to mix with kids, with much younger people? And I don't mean like going to a park or going to the movies or the mall or something. I mean in a digital space, like via computer. Like what is the how can I put it? What's the classic way that older dudes might their paths might cross with younger kids? Let's see what you guys say. SW Firefly says social media, beyond social media. There we go. Great. That's it. So yeah, he's talking about a game called Warzone and talking shit to kids. And over here, he refers to Xbox and Call of Duty, right? Do you think those are all the games that he plays? Do you think those are like the sum total of games that he's playing? Yeah, so gaming, acting like a teenager online, yeah. So, yeah, gaming. So I wish I could, or maybe it's a good thing that I can't. I've got a PlayStation 4 that I've got a couple of games for it, but you do pay a little bit more for, not sure if it's called LAN gaming or online, but it's basically where you play multiplayer games. In other words, where you can either be part of a team or you have, I think, one person you play against, right? But that's certainly a way that you can meet other people online. The thing is, it is a little bit more expensive. You've got to pay some kind of subscription, right? but that is definitely a way that someone can make certain connections. And if you are pretending to be a girl playing a girl game, that could be a way that you could meet girls, young girls, right? I'm not really, like, I can't really talk too much from experience in terms of, like, I don't really know much about games anymore. I used to play Counter-Strike, but like guy games. I played a little bit of Call of Duty. I quite like Tomb Raider, but I didn't really do much of the multiplayer games, just because I found it quite expensive and I didn't play enough games to develop relationships, kind of thing. When I lived in South Korea, you would go to a they called it a PC bang. It's a computer. What do they call it? Just like a normal computer, like an internet store. It's not really that. I'm just trying to think. PC bang. It's like a place where gamers go. And I went through a period where I played quite a lot of Counter-Strike, and then on that night that you're playing, you might play with a bunch of people that you know, maybe you don't know, some that you know, some that you don't know. The more regularly you play, the more the chances that you're going to bump into someone that you recognize and develop a relationship with them. So that's how guys can develop friendships and relationships and connections with guys, right? Other guys, other gamers, maybe other losers, maybe other, not, let's put it this way, bad apples. And it's also a way potentially to link up with girls who are playing. And I mean, there are some girls who play guy games, right? The shooter games. But I'm just saying that's an area that, besides social media, that we can see that Keegan Klein was into, and maybe that was a big part of how he would make connections in that area. You kind of get the idea that he was playing a lot of games, right? The other thing that I think is important to ask is, did Abby and Libby play computer games? If so, what games did they play? I seem to remember there was a game called, wasn't it called Second Life? Where you sort of, it like represented reality, and you sort of had a character and a role in that. I'm just trying to see if I can find it. I don't know if it was very big in, is it Second Life? Wasn't it another game that started with the letter S? Sort of a short word, like a role-playing game. Second Life. Do you guys know what I'm getting at? There was a game, Sims. That's it, Sims. And didn't girls like playing Sims? Anyone have daughters who played Sims? Let's just bring that up. Sims Wikipedia. Okay, there it is. Life simulation video games, sold nearly 200 million copies. When was it active? First release February 2000. So it fits into our timeline, although very widely. And then there were spin-offs. Sims 4 came out in 2014. And those are all the expansion packs. High school years. So really, I think if you're going into this area, you want to look at what was going on with some of these games, for example, in 2016, 2017. Let's see if we can find anything here. There's 2010, here is 2015. Sims Mobile, right? So Sims Mobile is the second free-to-play version for Android and that. It was announced on May 9, 2017, so that's too late for our purposes, right? That's too late for our purposes. Otherwise, if it had been, for example, December 2016, you could have thought that it was relevant. Let's have a look at what's that other game? Second Life. That came out 19 years ago. Let's just see if it deals with. Okay, anyway, the point is that the gaming narrative is maybe one that needs to be investigated, right? Another way to make connections, right? Monica says there's a Sim 5 in planning. Living in the Pine says, I'm literally playing the Sims right now as I watch this video. Okay. Love Tina says, Sims is fun. I would decorate a house, then move. Okay. It cost money back then. But do you agree that Sims is or let me ask the question, do you think Sims was played or is played more by girls than by guys? I mean, I don't think I've ever played it. Sue says, my daughter plays Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto. That's another big one. Oh, Vic says Sims is not an interactive game. Oh, I thought it was. I thought that was the point of it. Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought it was interactive. Well, it shows you how much I know. So anyway, then you need to try and find, are there some of those interactive games that were peaking in 2016, 2017? What games were Abby and Libby playing, right? That just might add another dimension to this whole story, right? Okay, yeah, so I get it. It's not multiplayer. So the point is, what game is it, right? That's the point. But he does say here that, you know, you can talk shit to kids while you are playing. Isn't that what he was doing? So in other words, we know that there was this moving of that he would meet someone on Instagram and then move them to Snapchat. But isn't it possible that he met them somewhere else before that? In other words, he met them gaming and they said, who are you? And he said, my name's Anthony. And then said, well, here's my Instagram, Anthony Shots. And that's how he got them there and then moved them from there to there, right? Doesn't that make sense? So that might help, you know, filling in the loop, right? So the detective says something here about, I get so damn mad, I got through it across, I got to throw it across the room. Then he says, talk so much shit. He's like 12. He's destroying you. It's ridiculous. It's like the little bastard I grew up on Nintendo, man, right? So what he's dealing with here is the online conversations accompanying playing some of these games, right? Okay. Are you guys getting something out of this analysis? Is some of your knowledge base sort of extending? Thanks a lot, Annette. Okay. Right, so let's continue. So the cop is kind of ingratiating himself, trying to speak the same language. Then there's this section from the transcript. Shall I do that? He says, I'm looking at the controllers trying to figure out which button. And we didn't have as many buttons and stuff here. And now I feel like I'm getting older and slowing down. Then the question comes up, how long have you been in Indiana back from Vegas? Like a year and a half, probably. Consistently the whole time, or were you just bouncing around? He says, yeah, well, pretty much consistent the whole time. Yeah. Next section. Yeah. And what phones do you have at your house? The iPhone goes through that. And then we go to the next slide. I think it's this one. Talks about it's in a black case. And then it comes up to quite an interesting point where he basically says, he's asked this question, are you on a lease, right? Are you on a lease? No. You don't pay? No, I don't pay rent or nothing. He says, how do you pull that off? How do you manage to stay for free? Well, she lets me stay. She lets me stay there really when I need to. Then the detective said, I tried slumming at a girl's house, man. I get my ass kicked out. Yeah. And you said you have an Xbox. So when you look at that, you kind of get the sense that maybe him and his girlfriend are playing computer games, right? But isn't there, how can I put this question? What possible reason could there be that a girl would allow this guy to stay with her for nothing? Because it's not really for nothing. What do you think it could actually be? Monica says, big gamer granny here. What possible reason would a girlfriend want her boyfriend to stay with her for nothing? What do you think the answer is? Mary says, define girlfriend. Okay. Yeah. So that's the first thing that I thought. Right? That's it. That's it. So what that kind of suggests is what is really going on behind the scenes. That's what he's selling. If he's selling that, is he not selling some other stuff as well online? Is he not, if he's gaming and selling that, isn't he selling other stuff online as well? So the next page deals with the Xbox. What color is it? And then he talks about a computer. And this part's quite interesting. He says, this is definitely interesting from the perspective of getting into Keegan Klein's office, essentially, right? What does his computer console look like? What is going on there, right? And he says, I don't even know what computer I've got. And then the detective says a Hewlett-Packard. Well, it just shows you that he does know. I think that is quite unlikely that he doesn't know. He says, yeah. Then he says, is it an all-in-one or does it have a tower? And he says, it's like a rectangle. I don't know. Like the disk and everything is all in the screen. Yeah, it's all in. Right? And then the next thing he says is, I plug it right into my TV, right? So don't you get a sense that when he's on his computer, or basically whether he's gaming, whether he's on his computer, whether he's watching porn, it's all in front of the same screen, right? You kind of get this idea that the lounge, the bedroom, and his desk is the same thing, right? He says, no, I plug it right into my TV. Then he says something about, I got to think I could play games on it or something because it was a little cheaper. But you can't do that. Well, I doubt whether that's true. He says something about you can't even really watch Netflix. So he's kind of saying, I have my computer connected to my TV, but I can't even watch Netflix. Do you believe that? Because, you can watch Netflix via your computer. It's not just via TV. Netflix is streaming, right? So do you believe it when he says that? Because the officer says to him, that's weird because that's streaming. And it's weird that he even brings up Netflix because no one asked him about Netflix. He said, I can't even watch Netflix. Do you think that's true? Anyway, then he says, I'm not on a plan right now. I just have text. He says, are you using Wi-Fi? Yeah, because I don't really ever, go anywhere without Wi-Fi. What's your current phone number? How's that for a suspicious answer? What's your current phone number? I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. Do you believe him? And so you can see the officer doesn't believe him. He says, you don't know your own phone number? And then they ask him again about LA. What did you do when you were out in LA? He says, the weed business. He says, yeah, it's booming out there. Right. And then I think there's a question about, what did you do with your old phone that you turned in? He said, I sold it on eBay. So obviously he turned in his old phone, I think, to the cops. Then they must have given it back and then he sold it. He said, that was a couple of months ago. Yeah, when I got the phone. Then he's asked, who's your internet provider? So can you see in August 2020, can you see in August 2020 just how our law enforcement were focusing on his computer, his online habits, his phones that he was using, his internet provider? That was kind of the focus. And one wonders, was that the focus in 2017? Was that enough of the focus in 2017? Yeah, good point, Wolfie. Look at what he says about his girlfriend. She pays for everything. Why do you think she pays for everything? So at this point, the conversation kind of stalls and you realize what the cops have been doing. They've basically just been making a list of all the devices he's got. That computer, that phone, that Xbox, that phone with that phone number. And the point of all that is to say at the end of that, can we search all of those devices that you've just mentioned? So they're not just having a nice conversation. They've basically been they've been trying to get him to list every single device that he's got so that they can search it at that moment, right? So at this point, I think it's page 25 or page 24, they basically say to him the following. I'm going to read this to you. We're obviously at the Peru, Indiana State Police, but your devices are located at this, and these are your rights, following constitutional rights. You have the right to require that a search warrant be obtained for any search of your property. You have the right to refuse to consent to a warrantless search. You have the right to talk to a lawyer. So all of that has gone on now was to get the police to this point where they could say, these are the devices you've told us about. Well, we're going to search all of them. And you have the right to refuse that, blah, 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 right? That was what was going on in August 2020. They go on to say, if you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you. The next part, if you're a juvenile but you're not, then he says, he talks about an iPhone, an Xbox, the Hewlett-Packard computer. I authorize these officers to seize any article of property which they consider evidence. I understand and know what I'm doing. No promises or threats have been made to me. And the last page I want to sort of draw your attention to, he says, I think this is page 25. I would go there a lot, to LA. And what would you do there? Our product and stuff there. What do you think that product was? So I think I'm going to stop there in terms of the analysis. We've been at it for, it's now the 2-hour mark, right? There's quite a lot to go through still. So what I want to end off with is this, dealing with this idea, firstly, of why did somebody commit double murder? That's the first question. The second question is, and you'll get this feeling when you watch or when you listen to that podcast, right? When you listen to this thing, is how are you supposed to tell when someone is, what's the word? What are the red flags, or what are the signs that someone is capable of or is a criminal, right? What are the signs? And the part that I find kind of ridiculous is, do you think that they walk around like with a billboard over their shoulders with like in lights what their browser history is? Do you think that they walk around with a t-shirt saying, I am whatever? Or do you think it's the opposite, that people pretend to be nice and people pretend to be normal and people pretend to be average, right? Like, what kind of universe do you live in where you say, wow, I can't believe that that person's the criminal? Well, were they supposed to tell you? I mean, how many movies are you watching where you think, oh, the bad guy dresses in black, or the bad guy is obviously bad, so he's bad. The bad guy's ugly and he growls when he speaks, so he must be the bad guy, right? Right? So let me say the following. You know, we live in a society that expects us to present a particular front, right? So we're asking two questions at the same time. Is, how do you tell when someone is a rotten apple? And the other side is, what society do we live in? Do we live in a society where if you are a rotten apple, you say, hey, I'm a rotten apple, right? What I'm trying to say is, in a way, society creates rotten apples. And also rotten apples create society. It's not like someone just comes out of nowhere, nothing. And I know a lot of people believe that crimes just happen randomly. Like someone just becomes evil and they commit a crime. No, it's connected to society. It's connected to dynamics. It's connected to childhood. It's connected to a lot of things. It's connected to a psychology. It's connected to sometimes fantasy, right? It doesn't just happen. Those motives don't just erupt out of a vacuum. They actually come out of the same society you live in. Well, that society touches criminals as well, and sometimes in not very nice ways. Now, as a kind of a simple way of addressing what I'm saying, Stephanie says who they are when they think no one is looking. A simple way to address this idea of society as a kind of tyranny, society as a kind of an unpleasant place to live, is think about it not from the blue collar perspective, but from the completely the other side, right? I saw this article on the New York Times, this one. Anyone remember Paulina Poroskova? Does that name ring a bell to anyone? So she wrote a memoir, and she says in that memoir the following: I've carried so much shame through my life for everything, for being pretty or not pretty enough, for having money when I didn't deserve that much money, for not being the child my parents wanted. Everything in life I've been ashamed of. Right? Everything in life I've been ashamed of. Now, what that is touching on is this idea that even when you're living ostensibly the perfect life, when you're at the top of the pile, when you're rich, when you're beautiful, when you're famous, you can feel ashamed of literally everything because the world makes you feel ashamed, right? That's the top of the pile. But you can be on the bottom of the pile and feel just as ashamed. You can feel ashamed because of you don't have this, or you don't have that, or whatever, right? I'm trying to say that our society can be quite cruel, even to those who should be happy in it, like Paulina Poroskova. Even if you like a royal, you're a prince or a king, society can demand that you act so perfectly that your life is like a living nightmare, right? Do you follow what I'm trying to get at? Is that acting and keeping up appearances to society can actually make your life a living hell, right? And if you think about the royal family and you think about how, for example, Prince Charles and Lady Diana, that's the acted relationship, or behind the scenes is actually an affair with Camilla, right? In other words, behind that sort of really kind of ANAL expectation, you must act absolutely perfectly. There's a dark underbelly where you don't act perfectly, where you do what you want behind the scenes. And if you have that in a scenario of the royal family and celebrities, right? Why wouldn't you have that everywhere else? And why wouldn't you also have it in a little small town where people are expected to be nice? And someone in that nice situation doesn't feel very nice. They were maybe bullied at school. They felt like an outsider, and their response was more and more just to go silent, just to they were sidelined, and then they accept life on the sidelines. And at the same time, a kind of a sadism arises out of that, where I was denied this and I didn't get that, and I want this, and I whatever. Well, now I want to feel good about something because I felt bad for so long, and that can manifest in a sadistic way, right? Are you starting to get a sense of how this thing that seems so strange is actually kind of inevitable if you're a certain disenfranchised person living in this supposedly nice society? How do you put up your hand in a nice society and say, I'm not feeling very nice. I'm not feeling like I want to be very nice because I don't know if I was treated very nice. But instead you play the role like the royal family do. You play the role of being nice. Meanwhile, you hide the thing that's not so nice. And certain things you've got to work very hard to hide away. And that then becomes a secret life. So we live in a society that expects us to present a particular front, right? A particular face, a particular facade, and some are more like that than others, right? Some are more like the face that they present and the facade they present than others. Some aren't like the facade they present at all. There's a lot of shit happening behind the scenes. And then behind that front, someone else starts lurking there. They're in plain sight. This is the part that I find kind of ridiculous. It's like, how on earth did this person hide in plain sight? Well, how did Chris Watts hide in plain sight until he committed the crime? He was also a nice guy until he committed the crime. In terms of the JonBenet Ramsey and the Madeleine McCann case, how is whoever committed that crime managing to get away with it? Well, isn't the answer in plain sight? Isn't it happening all the time? Aren't people not who they are in plain sight all the time? It's like, it's our society. Isn't social media pretending to be something while something else is happening in plain sight all the time? So this whole thing of, wow, they were living in plain sight. Yeah, but it's that is life. It's plain sight all the time. It's not something that is over there, it's something that's over here. It's not something that's out there, it's something that's in here, right? So when what is behind that front, the more that front is presented as a wall to the world, as you see with Polina Poroskova here, you present this perfect exterior. It doesn't even have to be perfect, it can just be nice. But the more you present a wall and you don't want to acknowledge that there's something wrong with that wall or there's something going on behind that wall, you don't want to acknowledge that, right? Well, the more things start taking place behind that front, behind that wall, in the alleys, in the alleyways of human behavior where no one's watching. The link here is that society tends to expect a certain type of ANALB, a character. We live in a society that expects us to be nice all the time and say the right thing. And what this does is it awakens a sadism. And in some, it awakens a really bad sadism. And in others, well, sadism at the same time, but sometimes not as bad, depending on to what extent you are religiously putting up this facade, like Chris Watts was. In short, beneath a fairy tale appearance that everything is normal is a nightmare where nothing is normal, right? And I think one's also got to look at Abby and Libby and ask, what facade were they putting up? Because we all put up facades, right? What facade were they putting up? Were they putting up a naughty girl facade? Were they putting up a mischievous girl facade? Were they putting up a flirty facade? And I don't want to blame them for what happened to them. I'm not trying to blame them for what happened to them because that's not the case at all. I'm simply saying everyone has facades, and at some point someone noticed their facade, right, and played a game of facades, of surfaces. And he knew how to play it because he was hiding his own, he'd been hiding it his whole life, right? So we've seen this all before, but what's the real problem? What's the real problem with facades and things? It's not being able to be real about ourselves or one another. In other words, we live in an inauthentic society, and that leads to a heavier burden on some who have to work harder to hide their flaws. Well, who do you think is working harder to hide their flaws? Well, it's often the guy or the girl who doesn't say anything because they find it's too hard. Their flaws are maybe too great, so they withdraw a little bit out of society. Because society has said, I see that your grandfather's the principal. I don't really like that. Okay, well, I'll withdraw. Am I not in your way now? Am I nice enough that we can all get along without me getting in the way? Okay, cool. So now I'll withdraw to that point that you are happy with my place in society. But then the question is, am I happy with what you say is my place in society? Am I happy to be this crushed in individual? Am I happy to, when I'm upset about something, I don't say anything? Am I happy when you aren't happy, you say so? When you are happy, you say so. But when I am, I'm not allowed to. But I know that if I don't say anything and you say something when you want to, we can kind of have a kind of a peace. What do you think that leads to? It leads to something welling up, right? Something welling up from the bottom that's not a nice feeling, that wants to manifest in some way, right? I think about this idea of being pushed around by society, being controlled by society, being dictated by society, being the uh, the victim in a sense of a tyrannical society. And the mentality there where you say, and I'm not saying me, somebody says, I like this idea of having someone young and small and female at my in under my control. In other words, the exact same thing that society did to me, pushed me down, controlled me, treated me like dirt. Well, I want to do that to society. Sorry, I want to do that to um, this person. I've been dominated by society. I've been dictated to by my world. Well, I want a world where I can be like in a gaming thing. I can be the king of my world. I can control someone. I can tell you what to do. I can do exactly what I want to do, right? Does that make sense? So somebody who's trying to work harder than everybody else to hide their flaws, to crush in their weaknesses, that person's feeling frustrated and then angry and then worse. So I want to put this up on screen. Can you see that? Tyranny. Let me do it like that. A tyranny, it's cruel and oppressive rule. A state under cruel and oppressive government, cruel, unreasonable, arbitrary use of power or control, absolutism, autocracy, dictatorship. A society and individual that can't be truly real doesn't need to hide in the shadows. Sorry, does need to hide in the shadows. If you're allowed to be real and you've got some flaws and the world sort of accepts you, then you don't need to hide in the shadows. But if being real, you get punished for that, then it tends to push you into the shadow. So I can tell you, when I was covering the Kylie Rodney case, I was covering it just the way that I thought it was happening. And then you find you're getting punished for that. You lose subscribers, people tell you horrible things, and you can feel society pushing back on you. You're being punished for saying what you think. And so either you change what you say to fit in with society, and how does that feel? Or you say, you know what, I don't accept that, and then you withdraw. And I kind of did that. I kind of withdrew from covering the Kylie Rodney case and also from saying the things I want to say, because society starts having an impact. What feelings do you have from that? Well, you feel invalidated, you feel frustrated, you feel angry, you feel a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. You feel a sense of powerlessness. It's not fair, it's not right, but that's how it is. Society rejects your power and authority. Society is imposing its power and authority, and deal with it. Hide away what you really think. Okay, well, how do you think that it's got to come out somewhere, doesn't it? So in this sense, dark things become darker because the world out there is really a tyrant. And much of what social media is a tyranny of personality cults or a tyranny of political correctness. Whatever it is, it's a tyranny. And tyrannies tend to spawn rebellions. When society itself is a tyranny of political correctness, or a tyranny of being nice, or a tyranny of everyone must say the same thing, or a tyranny of everyone must toe the line, it can lead to a silent rebellion when individual acts out the same cruelty, autocracy, and dictatorship he experiences on those around him. Okay. Yeah, in a word, injustice. Cash says, as I am the only person I'm certain exists, I can assume something. Okay. Mary says, I'm not sure I believe KK is a girlfriend. Okay, so that's about it from my side. I'm going to be back, I think, in about half an hour to talk about the Alec Baldwin case. If any of you want to buy one of these, I'll put a link to that in chat. It's obviously TCRS merch, and yeah, it's kind of a stealth black cap. And what does it say with product details? Decorated using puff embroidery, structured 6 panels, mesh black, plastic snapback closure, flat visor. But if you want any TCRS merch, you can get it at this link. I've ordered mine, so hopefully I'll be able to wear mine around about December. So if you're interested, there it is. Camille says, I promised myself I wouldn't get sucked into this case, but next coverage has me hooked. BW says, Alec needs attention. We are going to look at that. Stephanie says, nice. Thanks, Stephanie. Hope you're having a good weekend. That's also true. That's also true. Mark says, you don't give yourself enough credit. Thanks a lot, Mark. Wow, that's really, thanks a lot. Okay, I better get off so that I can get back on with the Alec Baldwin case. What's really interesting with that is it looks like he's released some crime scene photos and things out of the police report. And I think it's quite clever because if the DA released a discovery, you can imagine people being shocked. And so in a way, it allows Alec Baldwin to control the narrative, to say, via lawsuit, you guys did that, that, and that, and that, right? He can say, the armorer, look at that, and that, and that, and that. It's not coming from the district attorney. He's taking control of that narrative. It's quite a clever move, if you ask me. Okay. Wolfie says, I've only disagreed with you on one case, and that might have been my own blindness. What case is that? I'm scared I'm going to be stirring up a hornet's nest. What case did we disagree on? Actually, I think I know which one that is. It's D versus H, right? D versus H. Yeah, it starts in half an hour. Okay, I think I need to I thought it would be. I still maintain the same position, but for what it's worth. Bria says his strategy is very clever. Yeah. Good guess, hey? Good guess. But kudos to you for not exerting a tyranny on me and saying, oh, okay, I really disagree with you, but whatever. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So that is it from my side. Thanks everyone for being here. Again, if you're interested in the Alec Baldwin case, look out for that. Stephanie says I'll be able to chat more during the next live. So I'm looking forward to Alec Baldwin. There's some really interesting photos, and it's a 39-page complaint, but with quite a few photos in. So we're going to look at that. So I'll see you guys in about half an hour. Thanks a lot for the super chats. Thanks for the lovely conversation here. I hope you found it interesting. Thanks a lot, Wolfie. Perfect Imperfection says the same thing. Okay, cool. I think the main reason we disagree is I look at that case from a legal perspective. I don't look at it from I like this person or that person told a lie. I don't think either of them were completely honest, but that's not the bottom line. Anyway, that's a different case. Okay, always interesting. Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. See some of you in half an hour. Take care.